If you look at the outline, it really looks fine and dandy until you get to the last and final feature. It says national security focus includes special limitation on foreign access. Foreign organizations, individuals, and their institutions established or actually controlled shall not collect or preserve human genetic resources in China within the territory of our country. It may not provide human genetic resources of our country abroad. So basically, China has an access to a plethora of foreign genome data, and it restricts the outside world from its own. A bit suspect, but hey, that's just how China does everything, right? Then you look.
So this company in China, has about 8 million customers. It's like for pregnancy tests, and they've been collecting this DNA. I was just watching this. I figure I'll let you guys watch it with me, and I don't know, we'll talk about it. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Share. Let's keep going. Let's watch this.
Look at the investment front of the technology. Do you remember when I told you to remember that $215 million figure from earlier? That's what the US invested in the technology for disease prevention and treatment. Do you know how much the Chinese government invested? $9.2 billion. The US invested 2% of what China did. And it might not be for what the CCP wants you to think it's for. Enter.
This it's not the same thing. It's a different topic, but that who was it? There was a technology czar or something like that. So someone off of one of the head of our institutions, our protective agencies, that is a specialist for AI. Like, he's supposed to be our top AI specialist or something like that. Just so today is October 15th, 2021. Just about 2 days ago, it was said that he quit, saying that there was no way to catch China with the AI stuff. Now, horrible position to be in. You do not want to be at the whims of the CCP. So it looks like we're in a bad position in several different ways. And this is another one right here. And again, this is talking about, as you can see on there, China's nightmarish new bioweapon targets race and ethnicity. Some people I had seen start mentioning this. Some of my guys had started mentioning that might be a thing. And as it turns out, like, this is looking more and more like it's a thing.
Civil military fusion, or dual use biology. It was adopted in 2016 alongside that precision medicine thing I just told you about. So, as not to make any mistakes, let me just quote the Chinese military and scientists directly. The weaponization of biological bodies will become a reality in the future. Biotechnology will make biological weaponization a reality. New, non-traditional forms of confrontation, such as biological attack, biological destruction, and ecological control, will become possible. Biotechnological weapons can cause destruction that is both more powerful and more civilized than that caused by conventional killing methods, like gunpowder or nuclear weapons.
Wow.
The increased pace of development of modern biotechnology tells us that the day on which we will begin to make full military use of its advantages is not too far off.
Excellent.
We believe that command of military biotechnology is a reasonable scientific presumption, not a scientific illusion. Emphasis was placed on the potential offensive applications of biotechnology, including ethnic genetic attacks. In other words, attacks that target specific races or ethnic groups of people. Through gene manipulation, we can attack or injure one or more key human physiological functions. The ability to learn, memorize, keep one's balance, or perform fine motor activities. When attacking an enemy with biotechnological military weapons, we can cause physiological dysfunction by producing an ultramicro damaging effect to a gene or protein structure and functioning. Precision injury and ultramicro damage are two vulnerating methods based on genomics and proteomics. Unlike weapons that use ammunition whose damaging effects can only be ascertained after shooting, we can test in a laboratory to the degree of damage biotechnological weapons produce. We can control the degree of injuries and damage produced. and even provide an antidote or a cure, a vaccine, a counter-vulnerating agent, or a piece of bioinformation. Providing such an anodyne to our enemies would represent real mercy. You see, China has agreed to non-proliferation of bioweapons, and it has stated that it abandoned all bioweapons research that it previously pursued. It also consistently denied any interest or pursuit of biological weapons in formal statements, declarations, and disclosures by its state leaders and media. However, I want you to pay very close attention to this. It also states China should not hesitate, if it should have to defend itself, to use as many means of warfare as possible, including weapons that are not permitted by international law and rules of war, such as chemical, biological weapons.
Let's
Do you under-
just take a note right there, real quick. That is the CCP openly putting out warning that it should not hesitate if it should have to defend itself without it actually defining terms of why and when it would have to defend itself. So that's a really important thing there. And as we review these types of things, it's important to take those types of notes because we just read something, it sounds alarming. And lo and behold, when you actually break it down, it sounds even more alarming because they're not even defining these things. So we as citizens of the world, let alone citizens of another nation that they might be aiming their things at, know what is going on, know what terms that they're using. At this point, they're just saying they don't give a shit. When they say they don't care, they're just saying exactly that. They don't care about international law. The rule of law is dead as far as international law. That's the thing with globalization, man. Is you think people are just going to listen to you just because you say that they should. And you have to be really careful with all that type of stuff and the type of trust that you get people to have in these institutions, organizations, and nations, because it's not necessarily true that they're going to save you.
Understand the absolute hypocrisy of these statements. This is something that the Chinese government does in business, trade agreements, and world institutions. They say one thing and they do another. And you, behind the language barrier, do not understand why they're doing so. Whether it's lab-born or natural, the pandemic has been a fantastic proof of concept for the Chinese government to show how devastating a negative biological impact can be, and has successfully tested how it can be used for domestic propaganda. In other words, look at the rest of the world in economic and social squalor, bickering over vaccines, and turning the pandemic into a partisan issue. Think Republican versus Democrat. While we, China, have controlled the narrative and blocked enough information about the true devastation of the virus here at home, that the Chinese populace sees us,
Look at that.
the CCP, as...
Isn't that crazy? That's the hammer and sickle. And I know, you guys have probably seen that flag with the Chinese flag before, but like, if you haven't studied the hammer and sickle, if you don't understand that this always leads to horrible situations, you need to get aware. There's a, where is it? Be over that way. There's the hammer and sickle on the flag thing over there on the 100. Guys, if you haven't studied this stuff, please, I compel you to start studying this stuff so you know what's happened throughout history and what happens when you let these types of people take over. And look at that lady. She looks nice. She looks like a really nice, pretty Asian lady. And these people are programmed. And anyone that works as an agent for a communist organization of any kind is highly demoralized, and they're just climbing through the ranks. They're not trustworthy because they're demoralized. They will sell you out no matter what. That's what demoralized people do, especially of the totalitarian nature which we're seeing. These are the Maosheviks. They're here. They're here. They've been here for a while, but now they're pretty open about fact that they're Maosheviks. That doesn't mean that there's no sneaky stuff going on. There's a lot of sneaky stuff going on, but say the quiet part out loud. Call them what they are.
As not only the victors, but also the saviors. There is a fantastic podcast I just listened to from my buddy Jordan Harbinger. It's a good friend of mine. He puts on an excellent show. He just interviewed a guy named Rob Reed on episode 510. The episode's called Why the Future is a Good Kind of Scary. They talk about, while the fact that COVID-19 has been devastating on a global scale, it's comparatively benign when we consider how bad it could have been, with a deadlier, more transmissible virus and a decimated infrastructure without access to basic necessities. He talks about why gain-of-function research is so dangerous, and he talks about how the death toll inflicted by the society's mass murderers is limited only by the weapons that they have available. It's absolutely fascinating stuff, and I highly, highly recommend you check it out. It's completely free. Link is down in the description and the pinned comment. Definitely give it a listen. And don't forget to subscribe. No matter where you get your podcast, make sure you subscribe to the show.
Subscribe.
I recommend it. But riddle me this. How are we not paying attention to the fact that high-ranking people in the Chinese military are publishing books and papers and possibly coinciding with biomilitary research that quite literally is a biological weapon that targets the human genome to specifically attack certain ethnicities and races? And they're using American and international data to do
keep on doing stuff.
All while blocking the world from access to their own data. There is a serious imbalance in how China is treated. And no, I'm not...
Yeah, it's not by mistake. When I say Maosheviks, I really mean Maosheviks. These are people who have taken on the Bolshevik and a Maoist ideology, whether by choice, by conscious intent, or unintentionally, because they're being programmed and conditioned and essentially brainwashed. And people have been their whole lives by entertainment, by sports, by politicians, by the healthcare system. There's many ways that we've been seeing people be programmed, so that not only do they not they don't respect any of the old rule of law. They don't actually usually realize where we've come from. They believed a lot of propaganda about our history, which is completely, I should say, there's been a lot of really biased stuff in the education system to make us look away from certain things. This being one, CCP. Like, we should have learned more, that's for sure, and the Bolsheviks. And that's why I'm doing this. It's because the Maosheviks have to be called what they are. They have to be seen for what they are and understood for what they are.
Not calling for war. War is devastation. Bad information led to the Iraq War. Immoral torture techniques used by the U.S. government on terrorists misled American leaders to think that there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. It led to literal devastation, and it was unnecessary at that. Colin Powell led us Americans to believe, based on his intel, that there was going to be biological weapons of mass destruction against Americans, and we went to war. And countless people died. Billions of dollars were lost, and over 200,000 people have died at the hands of both sides since the U.S. invaded Iraq. That disaster was from weak and bad information. Guess what? Here we are with actual documents from the Chinese military, which outlines research about how to racially target people's genetics of certain ethnicities to torture, disable, and murder them. And somehow, that's okay. We have a country's government with more than 4 million people's blood on their hands because its face, reputation, and pride was more important than being transparent and stopping the spread of a deadly pandemic. Its lies did this to the world.
Look at him.
And to rub salt in the
Maosheviks.
wound,
All lined
it
up.
blames the USA and other countries for the origin.
Let me give you a
It
note.
threatens.
So here's what I think would be an important note on this when I talk about Maosheviks, because I know some people are just gonna um, assume I'm just smashing a bunch of stuff together. So I wanna cover something, and what that is basically that just because someone falls under the umbrella of being a Maoshevik doesn't mean that there won't be several factions of what we consider Maoshevism to be. Meaning there will be the branch in the CCP, and they might not even necessarily work hand in hand with some of the other branches. But the reason I'm using this identification and this distinction is because it's going to become a lot easier to determine what we're looking at. Meaning, if someone is like they're highly like an American, like we'll say a Biden administration Maoshevik. They're the Maosheviks of the American administrations and American politics. There will be Maosheviks in China of their kind, and so they can be, in the distinction that I'm using, they can be at odds with each other, but that doesn't mean that they're not pushing humanity and civilization in the same direction. And ultimately, like that's what I'm trying to make clear here. I'm not even saying that Israelis or British or Saudis or anyone. I'm not saying anyone is free from it at all. I'm saying there are some other distinctions to make as far as what people are in their factions. And I'm not saying every single faction of a thing falls under Maoshevism whatsoever, but I do believe it's the overarching umbrella of what we're seeing, because we're going to see, we're already seeing kind of these the critical race theory stuff. Not just here, it's like I don't know if you guys have paid attention, but over in Europe and in Australia and Canada, they've been dealing with the same exact thing. All these westernized cultures have been dealing with the same exact stuff. It's just a globalized ideological subversion, basically. It's not just one nation at a time now. What the globalists learned to do was they learned to take what was attacking nations individually and to apply it on a grand scale, like really ramp it up to a macro, if that makes sense to you.
Military conflict. We and the rest of the world usually say we should treat China with compassion and understanding. Meanwhile, China says kill all foreigners with bioweapons. However, we don't need to respond with hate. No, inclusion and understanding is one of the best attributes of American culture. It's not perfect, but I believe that America is a nice
Some good
country
B-roll.
with people, for the most part, who
Going
are
out
very
and meeting
welcoming.
people.
I think China's the same. I spent 10 years there. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world. It's a beautiful country with friendly people, but the Chinese government is hell-bent on changing that. And in a culture of face, like China, reputation, the Chinese government needs to stop getting a free pass on everything. They need to lose face diplomatically.
What is that?
China should not be allowed
What
to
is
participate
that?
in
Oh
global
my
institutions when it constantly and consistently breaks the rules, points the blame, and gets a pass after making serious threats at the free world. Military incursions, bioweapons, censorship, government-sponsored xenophobia, genocide, and weaponized nationalism. All
Yeah, the irony of the spreading of like CRT, Maoism, so forth, is that the Maoists of the CCP and the CCP itself, they love the weakening of all the other cultures. They love for there to be this spread of this ambiguity, so no one can actually take a stand on anything, and everyone's divided. And I'm not saying they're the only ones, because there's plenty of people who want that, and plenty of other factions who fall under Maoism and otherwise. But I'm saying that particular thing to keep people divided, arguing, really distracted from what's going on with maybe like supply chains, with your food, with your technology, with your security, with all your protective measures, with the sentiments of your population's job markets. There's many things to pay attention to, and a lot of these things become distractions to kind of soften people and to make them not concerned or focused on the things that matter, which, by the way, is your local community, is your locality, are your neighbors, are your community, are the farms around you and the small businesses that you frequent. These are the things that matter most. And while we do have to pay attention to some of the things that are going on in the world, because otherwise we might get caught with our pants down, it doesn't mean you have to only focus on that. Actually focusing primarily on the locality and what's going on within your community with your people is paramount, because that is what's going to dictate security of all kinds, when things are good and when things are not good. Well, sounds like this guy's finishing up, so we'll probably finish up here in a minute.
That the pandemic has caused. The vaccine versus no vaccine protest.
Just wanted to wing one, guys. Get some content out there. I have another one I was supposed to put up.
Is a diversion away from what the Chinese
about
government
Australia
is actually doing right now.
last week.
How do you not see it?
And the Australian protests.
And if nothing is done now, then when?
There's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm trying to cover a bunch of it, but it's a lot. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, guys.